Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome once again to Convention of States, Indiana Live. Again, the purpose of our broadcast every Monday night is to reach out to the residents and Hoosier residents here in the state of Indiana and beyond, but to reach out to those individuals that maybe are not part of our movement as yet and just want to learn a little bit more about it. Or perhaps you're involved in our movement and just want to continue learning more about Convention of States. So that's what we're trying to accomplish here. And I'm going to then bring myself up on the screen here and say hi to everyone. I'm a little crooked on my screen there, so I'll get in the center of it for you. My name's Dale Parrish. I'm the state director for Convention of States here in Indiana. And again, this is to reach out to the Hoosier grassroots here in Indiana to try and get more people involved in our movement. Now, our broadcast this evening, as with every broadcast, is in two parts. The first half of the broadcast, we will deal with what we refer to as the basics of Convention of States. And then in the second half of our broadcast, we're going to discuss a topic. And tonight we're discussing the Electoral College. And as you know, that's a topic that has been certainly in the news here lately. And tonight we're going to have, we're going to have Paul Phillips with us this evening. Paul is our legislative liaison and a vice state director here in Indiana. You've probably seen him on other broadcasts. But Paul will be joining us to talk about the Electoral College, and I'm sure you're going to find it very interesting. Now, before we go further, I just want to alert you that in the event that we would have a complete shutdown of the broadcast, in other words, if the whole thing goes blank here, please don't hang on. Don't wait for us to come back on, because when this happens, everything shuts down and it just takes too long to get it all back up and running again. So if this happens, just please plan on joining us again next Monday evening, and we'll pick up again then at the next broadcast. So just want to let you know in case that would happen. All right. Now, let me bring up my PowerPoint and for the presentation. And let's see here. I don't see, I've had a problem here. See, this is the kind of thing that happens sometimes with this program. Can't, there it is. Okay. I had it all set to go and it disappeared on me. So, all right, let's bring it up here. Now I'm going to activate the slideshow option here so that you'll be able to see it even better. So I think we should be ready to go here. Sorry for that temporary delay. All right. We have, first of all, we have here in Indiana and nationally, but here in Indiana, we have a number of resources available to us here with Convention of States. And the main resource that we have is our national website, which is conventionofstates.com. Now, you're going to hear us make reference to this website frequently because it just contains a wealth of information. So if any of you are listening to this for the first time and just hearing about Convention of States, the first thing I want you to do is go to this website, conventionofstates.com, open an account and sign our petition and begin to read and learn about us. Now, you'll also find embedded in the national website, you're going to find our state website page, which will be at conventionofstates.com/Indiana. So that page, of course, is more focused on our state of Indiana. Now we're on various social media platforms. Facebook, where we have a state page, Indiana state page. It's Convention of States, Indiana. As a matter of fact, this broadcast is coming to you through that Facebook page. So if you're on Facebook, that's where you can find us, Convention of States, Indiana. YouTube channel, we have a YouTube channel called COS Indiana. Please check out our channel. Be sure to click on subscribe. And now our YouTube channel, you're going to find on there is very much an educational resource. We have a number of narrated PowerPoint presentations that I've created. As a matter of fact, the PowerPoint presentation we're using tonight is an abbreviated version of one of those. So a number of PowerPoint presentations on there, recordings of these broadcasts that we're doing here will be on there. And we also have Paul Phillips, our guest tonight, does a podcast that's called The Free to Be Free. And we have links on our YouTube channel to all of his podcasts. So you definitely want to check those out. As a matter of fact, our topic tonight, the Electoral College, is in fact based on one of his podcasts covering the Electoral College. Other social media platforms, we're on Twitter, hashtag COS Indiana. We're on Instagram, Convention of States, Indiana. And we are getting set up on LinkedIn. I don't have an address for you right now, but we're in the process of setting ourselves up on LinkedIn. All right. A few numbers here before we get going. In 2018, we surpassed in Indiana, we surpassed 30,000 supporters here in our state. And we have been growing very, very quickly here in Indiana. Been growing at about a 40% growth rate. So based on that growth rate, we're projecting in 2019 to hit 40,000 and hopefully surpass that. And we're on target. We're en route to achieving that number. So as I said, we've been growing very, very quickly here in Indiana. Of the 30,000 plus supporters, we have about 2,900 that have indicated a willingness to volunteer if called upon. And then we have about 40 right now in leadership positions. If you are interested in being involved in Convention of States, I encourage you, please go to our here's that website again that I mentioned, conventionofstates.com. Click on the menu selection, Take Action. Scroll down and look at the different volunteer leadership positions that we have available. If anyone is of interest to you, open it up, read more about it. And if you're still interested, go ahead and make application. Now, you're not obligated in any way, but what happens when you make application, then your name comes up on a report that we get every day. And one of us then will be in contact with you to discuss further your interest in that particular position. Once again, you're not obligated in any way, so don't feel like you're obligating yourself here. So we'd love to have you involved. So please, conventionofstates.com, take a look at those positions. All right. Okay, let's move on then. I want to start off here with our vision statement here in Indiana. Our vision is to build a Hoosier grassroots community of citizens and legislators dedicated to the constitutional concept of self-governance. So this is what we focus and what we're oriented toward accomplishing someday here in Indiana. So that's our vision statement. Now, let's get into the basics. There are three tenets of the Convention of States movement. First is the problem, second is the solution, and the third tenet is the plan. So let's get going on this. The problem basically is that we feel our government's out of control, lacks the will and the courage to address certain structural issues in our federal government that are not being addressed. Now, we're not blaming any one political party. Actually, both parties have contributed to this problem. Been going on for decades. This is not a recent thing. Been going on for decades. It's just that our federal officials lack the will and the courage to address these problems. Now, to further define the problem, we've identified three major abuses that we feel need to be addressed. The first one is our national debt. Now, as you know, if you've been following this any at all, our national debt is over $22 trillion now. And we're not going to go into detail on these tonight, but just to give you an overview here. So the first abuse that we think needs to be addressed is our national debt. The second abuse is the regulatory crisis. You know, the administrative state in our government is considered now the fourth branch of government. Now, I know the current administration has been eliminating some regulations, and that's good. More needs to be done. As a matter of fact, a great deal more needs to be done. But we also need to implement some controls on how these regulations and laws and so forth are created. So we need to address the administrative state, namely the regulatory crisis. And the third abuse that we see has to do with state sovereignty. When our country was founded, we were founded on the concept of dual federalism, where the states and the federal government shared power. Well, that's tilted all in the favor of the federal government. We think career politicians play a big role in this, power, money. So we think this is an area that is being abused and needs to be addressed. So those are the three abuses that we've identified. Now, the solution, we think, and this is very important, this is what we're all about. We believe that there should be a convention of states called for the purpose of amending the Constitution to address those abuses that we just mentioned. Now, in Article 5 of our Constitution, Article 5 describes the two methods of amending our Constitution. And we're going to just briefly touch on those tonight. But there are two methods described in Article 5 to amend the Constitution. So let's quickly look at each one. The first method is the one that's been used. This is the method that has been used to create the amendments that we have to date. And that's where 2/3 of Congress agree upon an amendment or amendments that need to be made to the Constitution. Then they send those to the state legislatures, whereby it requires 34 states or 3/4 of the state legislate. Excuse me. Let me back up here. The ratification process requires 3/4 of the states to ratify any amendment or amendments. That's 38 states. All right. It's easy to get confused on this. I'm sorry. Ratification requires 3/4 of the state legislatures or 38 states for an amendment or amendments to be ratified. Now, method 2 is right in Article 5. We're not making this up. This is right in Article 5 of the Constitution. If 2/3 of the state legislatures, which would be 34 states, make application to hold a convention of states for the purpose of creating proposed amendments, then that convention has to be held. So it requires 2/3 of the states, or 34 states, to make application to hold a convention of states for the purpose of amending the Constitution. Now, any amendments that come out of that convention have to go through the same ratification process as in option or method one. 3/4 of the state legislatures, or 38 states, would have to ratify any amendment or amendments before they became amendments to the Constitution. All right. Well, what's our plan? What's our plan to bring this about? It's two parts. The first has to do with the application strategy. As I just mentioned, 34 states have to make application to hold this convention. We have, Convention of States, we have designed literally the application that we want 34 states to approve. It's also referred to as the resolution. And we currently have 15 states that have done this, and Indiana is one of those. But we need to get to 34. Now, this application or resolution that I speak of, in the subject matter of that application, which determines the agenda of the convention, is very, very important. That the subject matter is broken into three parts, three sections. First would be fiscal restraints, which would deal with the debt issue. The second would be limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, which would address the second abuse that I mentioned. And the third area has to do with term limits on Congress and federal officials. That would address, we think, the sovereignty, the third abuse. Okay, so that's the application strategy. The other part of our plan is mobilizing the grassroots. And when I say grassroots, I'm talking about you, me, our state legislators, mobilizing the grassroots to get this done. And the grassroots forms a major, major part of our structure in Convention of States. Very, very important. As I mentioned earlier, here in Indiana, we're over 30,000 supporters. Nationally, we're over 3.8 million supporters. So we're continuing to grow. We're now in all 50 states. So once again, if you're interested in getting involved, we would love to have you join us to bring this about. So please go to our website, conventionofstates.com, and take a look at us, please. All right, let's get back here to our broadcast, and I'm going to take out my PowerPoint, and I'm going to bring in my guest this evening, and he's going to pop up here any minute right now. Hello, Paul.
Hey, Dale. How are you doing?
Good, good. Glad to have you tonight. Thank you for coming in.
Glad to be here again.
Paul, we're going to talk about the Electoral College tonight, aren't we? And I know which podcast is it that you
this would be podcast number 16.
16. See, he does so many of these. It's hard keeping track of which one is which. But now, if I recall right, the title of the podcast is not just Electoral College, is it? It's what is the actual title of the podcast?
I titled it Hillary Splaining the Electoral College because it features some of her comments on it, and obviously because in the last election, although she won the popular vote, she didn't win the Electoral College, and therefore we have Donald Trump as president.
So now it's a big topic with her to discuss that, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, Paul, let's get started, and let's start here with the framers' intent. What was intended by the framers, when they developed this concept of electoral college?
Well, sure. They were looking for a good way to elect the executive, the president. And the initial proposal by James Madison was to have the House of Representatives chosen by the people, then to have the House elect senators, and then the House and Senate to elect a president. But they quickly realized that was a bad idea because of the opportunity for corruption and deals between a presidential candidate and the House and the Senate. So what they settled on were a special group of electors appointed by each state legislature, and that group of people then would elect the president. And actually, these electors meet in December each year to elect the president, even though we vote in November. And the way the system works today is when you cast a vote for a presidential candidate, you're actually selecting an elector who's pledged to vote for that candidate at the choosing of the president in December.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned then that what was the thing about the states the equal representation? Is this how the...
Right. So essentially what's going on with the Electoral College is we're having 51 concurrent elections for president. I say 51 because the District of Columbia is included with the 50 states. And we're taking the results of these 51 elections and adding them together, weighted based on their population. If you think realize the largest states have the most electoral votes. So it's 51 independent elections that are amalgamated together to determine who the president is.
So in a way, it is sort of a popular vote in a way, since but it's the popular vote for the most part, at least. It's the popular vote for each state, not the national popular vote, right?
That's correct. For 49 of the states, the winner of the popular vote in that state gets all of the electors for that state. Maine and Nebraska are the exceptions. They allocate 2 electors to the winner of the popular vote in the state, and the remaining electors are allocated based on the congressional districts, who wins each district. But okay, it's a method that provides a little more equal weight to the states in choosing the president. And personally, I think one of the downsides of a popular vote is that the large population centers have a lot more advantage over some of the less populated states in selecting the president.
Okay, hold on to that thought, because I got a map that I found that I'm going to show you here pretty soon. But let's talk. And of course, one of the issues when we start bringing in this national popular vote movement, and which we're going to address here very shortly, but is the effect that would have on campaigning and how candidates. You want to talk about that? How the effect that would have on campaigning?
You know, it's kind of the popular belief that you go back to the election of 2016 and you say, oh, if we would have went by popular vote, Hillary would have won. Well, I would argue you can't say that for sure, because if the rules are different, if it's popular vote, the candidates and their campaigns are going to behave differently. It's widely thought that Donald Trump won because he visited some states at the end of the election, right before election eve, to solidify the vote in places like Michigan, for example, some other Midwest states.
Right.
If we had the popular vote, then the candidates would simply need to campaign in the large population centers like New York City, LA, some other large cities, Houston, and so on. And, you might think this is a good or bad thing, but nobody would care about the Iowa caucus anymore, right? We wouldn't see all of the candidates at the Iowa State Fair eating all of that fried food and all of that kind of thing to start the campaign there.
Right. This might be a good time to bring up this map, and then we'll come back to. But you can see on this map. Let me get that agenda item off of there so you can see it better.
Yep.
You see that okay, Paul?
Yeah, I love that map. You know, the Los Angeles County is bigger than each of those states in terms of population.
Now, and you know how the vote would go in Los Angeles County. We all know how that vote would go. And if you had a number of municipal centers like that across, well, on each coast, and throw in Chicago in that, then and I think, as a matter of fact, in your podcast, Hillary actually acknowledges that.
Yeah, in the quote, or it's not necessarily a quote, it's an audio clip that I have of her. She acknowledges that her votes came from the large population areas. She equated that to a large portion of the GDP for the country, where all the innovations coming from, all the cool people live, lots of things like that.
Yeah. Okay, well then let's actually let's talk about, this is a national movement, the National Popular Vote.
Right. It's the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is the official name of the group. And I throw that out there because that word compact is an important piece of this. So basically what it is, it's a number of states getting together, forming an agreement, and this is passed by the state legislature and signed by the governor, an agreement that once they get enough states in this compact where their electoral votes total 270, which is the majority needed to win the presidency, once they have states totaling 270 electoral votes, it goes into effect, and they're all committing to award their electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote. It would be a drastic change. It'd basically be an end around the Electoral College.
Right. And it puzzles me how in the world a state would feel like their electoral votes are really representing their state if in fact it was all based on the national popular vote. I just don't understand that.
Well, and if you think about it, an elector whose duty is to choose the president of the United States is actually a state elected office, just like a state legislator or state senator or the governor of the state. So what each of those states are doing is they're turning over the election of a state official to people in other states, to the national popular vote. And that to me is just abridging the vote of citizens of the state. It's canceling out their vote and substituting for it votes from people from other states. Okay.
Let's wrap it up here. We wanted to touch on the 14th Amendment, right?
Right. There are two parts of the Constitution that I believe are relevant to this. And one is Article 1, Section 10, Paragraph 3, which, among other things, states that any compact entered into by the states must be approved by Congress. So even if they get to their 270 electoral votes, they're going to have to go to Congress and get them to approve this as well. But the 14th Amendment also states that if any state in any way abridges the vote of any of its citizens, that those states could lose representation in Congress. And as I explained, canceling out the vote of state voters voting for a state elected office and substituting the will of the country in general, people in other states, is clearly abridging their vote. So I believe this compact, once they get, or if they ever get to 270 votes, they're going to face some really steep legal and constitutional challenges to actually get it implemented.
Right, right. All right. Well, great, Paul. I want to thank you very much for leading us in that discussion. Now, before Paul leaves here, I want everyone to know that next Monday night, Paul is going to be back with us again, and we're going to be talking about term limits, which is always a very interesting topic. And Paul and I both have written about this topic. So again, Paul's got a podcast on it. I've got a narrated PowerPoint on our YouTube channel on this topic. So we'll both be discussing term limits at our next broadcast on April 22nd. So, Paul, I want to thank you again for coming on.
Always happy to be here.
We'll be seeing you again. Thanks a lot. Okay. Let's wrap it up here this evening then. I mentioned our next broadcast is going to be, as I said, will be next Monday evening, and at same time, 7 p.m. And our topic's going to be term limits, so you'll definitely want to tune in for that. Before I forget, I want to recognize a few of our viewers this evening, and I want to thank you all for being with us tonight. Barbara Hamblin. Okay, Barbara, thank you for being with us tonight. And Richard Loken. Richard's one of our district captains here in Indiana. So thank you, Richard, for joining in tonight. And who else do we have here? James Cressy. I hope, James, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. James, I believe, lives in Missouri and has been tuning in to us for some weeks now. So, James, thank you very much for coming in, tuning in again with us tonight. Well, let's wrap it up. We try to keep this broadcast at about 30 minutes. Sometimes we go a little over, but so let's wrap it up for tonight. And I'm going to, once again, my favorite quote from our president of Convention of States, Mark Meckler, where he talks about a fundamental question facing our country. And that question is not what we should do. That question is who will decide. And just like it says here in our poster, the question facing us is a two-word question, very simply, who decides? And those of us in Convention of States, we believe that is we the people. We the people should have more of a say-so in who decides. So everyone, I want to say thank you very much for joining us once again, and be looking for you again next Monday evening, 7 p.m. We'll be talking about term limits. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye.